Casey, I'm really excited about our guest today. He's been my Unbeatable Mind mentor and faculty member, and a big supporter of Fierce Planet Adventures mission. And this conversation's been almost a year in the making.
I agree. Super excited. And let me introduce our guest today. And he holds a master's degree in transpersonal counseling psychology and is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He did postgraduate studies in somatic and health psychology. He received his coaching certification from New York University. He is a graduate of SEALFIT's 3-week SOF Academy and Kokoro Camp. He's also studied various martial arts, including Taekwondo, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, and Shaolin Kempo. He's also certified in MoveNet and Spiral Dynamics. Today's guest is Michael Ostrolenk. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to see you guys again. And as Andrew said, I am a huge fan and supporter of your all's work. So it's exciting to be here talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we kind of like to start the conversation off by asking, what are you grateful for today?
Actually, we were just talking about this offline. It's the second beautiful day in a row. It's in the 60s and 70s, and this morning gave us an opportunity for almost an hour and a half walk with our dog, which we also did yesterday too. And it's so nice to see the flowers emerging and sun shining and people smiling. And we're obviously living in COVID times, people being out of their house because it's not 20 degrees and enjoying the weather. So I'm grateful just for the weather and the time with my wife and our dog this morning.
Great.
Yeah.
So Michael, transpersonal psychology, for our listeners, what does that mean?
Sure. So just so everyone knows, when I did my graduate work, we had to study all the regular schools of psychology, things that every other psychotherapist, marriage and family therapist would study. But I got to study what you're asking about is transpersonal psychology, which I would define it in a few different ways. One is it studies the higher states and stages of consciousness. It also studies non-ordinary states of consciousness, or you might call it altered states of consciousness. And we can get into some of the tools and technologies which induce those states. It also explores the spiritual systems within all the just religious systems. So like any religion has spiritual practices, prayer, meditation, yoga, sensory deprivation practices, chanting, singing, dancing. I mean, depending obviously on what the religion is. All these practices are intended to change consciousness, expand consciousness, open the heart, possibly free the body. So we study these various tools and technologies that have been around since the beginning of time that human beings have used to kind of grow themselves to the next level of functioning.
Wow, pretty interesting. I love it. So how would you say that relates to marriage and family counseling?
Great question. So I'm still licensed as a marriage and family therapist, but just so folks know, I practice now as a coach. I don't practice as a therapist for a wide variety of issues. We can get into it another time or later on if you want to. But a couple of things it does for me in my work. It gives me a bigger concept of who we could be as human beings. So when I'm working with a couple, or I'm working with a family, or I'm working with a group of people, I help them see that the way they perceive themselves and live their lives is very limited. A lot of it's cultural programming, family of origin programming, which we all have. But there are ways conceptually that they can see that who they are is much larger than that, but also experientially. And that's really what is even more important than conceptually. It's like, how can I experience myself as something bigger than the identity I carry around, especially kind of more of from a heart-opened, loving, caring space, which is really helpful in a marriage or in a coupledom or whatever the relationship might be. So you can kind of transcend the limitations and live more from an essential heart-opened, loving, caring space.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. So I guess my follow-up question is, so we're talking about, to some degree, the stories we tell ourselves, or the stories that we've been molded into by our families, not just our immediate families, but perhaps generations back, going back generations. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so actually that's perfect. So it's intergenerational stories that goes back our familiar lines. So yes, it's also kind of, you could say, some of our ancestral lines that's not specific to our family, but maybe if you come from a specific location on the planet Earth, you can track your family back there, that there's a way that they live their lives for maybe hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of years, which inculcate us as how we should operate in the world. And more recently, we all live in certain cultures and subcultures. So we don't have to go back hundreds and thousands of years. We just go back today, a couple hours ago, and we have, programming of sorts. I mean, you watch TV, it's called programs because it's programming you to see the world in a certain way. It's our education system programs you, our family of origin programs you, our religious systems program you. There's lots of different programs, and it's no value judgment. That's just the way it is. And the ideal though is to start creating some distance between yourself and those programs. You can say, oh wait, the way I'm living is programmed from these various institutions and systems and cultural forms, and I can then choose to live out those cultural norms and belief systems, or I can choose not to and create my own path. At least at that moment, you're at choice. And you two are the perfect exemplars of that. I mean, you're supposed to have a 9 to 5 job and work 5, 6, 7 days a week, or whatever the hell it is, probably like 8 to 7 hour, 8 to 7 every day. And you guys are like, no, we're going to do our own thing. So you guys are like a perfect example of like, oh, we have this cultural programming, what the norm is, what you're supposed to do. And you guys are like, yeah, we're going to do our own thing. So that's kind of like, it's intergenerational, it's immediate family, it's our own biography, like what happened to us from conception to the present moment. Then all these cultural forces program us to live our lives a certain way.
What would be someone's starting point to just begin to think about that, their cultural programming, or their programming in general, and making decisions as to whether or not a program, or a certain programming is correct for them, or they should hold on to it, or let it go?
So I would say a basic capacity that would be useful for everyone to develop who wanted to kind of play in this space is just meditation. Now, we could actually choose one cultural programming if you want to and kind of dissect it,
Yeah.
deconstruct it, break it down, and offer like a way of looking at it cognitively, which is fine. Or I could just say, one of the basic skill sets that would be useful is just meditation, because meditation, as you guys know, because this is what you guys do and teach, is it allows you to kind of create some space between you and your thoughts, feelings, sensations, energetics of the physical body. And then as you create that space, you can see it more clearly. You're no longer identified with it. You can see it. And when you can see things at a distance like that, then you can start playing around with it. And that's when you can start saying, wait, well, I can see this cultural force that structures my mind to think a certain way. Like I can create some distance from it. I can look at it and go, that's interesting. Okay. It doesn't serve me anymore. I want to try something different. I want to try maybe a different hat on. Or as Timothy Leary might say, reality, actually it's Robert Anton Wilson might say, I want a new reality tunnel to see the world through. But I would say the first skill set that could be really useful is kind of a meditative practice to start with.
That was a very powerful turning point for us when we started the meditating and the witness practicing, and separating the stories we were telling ourselves, or that we've been told, and we're able to gain some distance between those stories and our actual being, ourself, and realizing that we didn't have to accept those stories or live out those stories anymore. And that's when the pivot for us started to happen. The change started to take effect. And so, yes, I agree absolutely that meditation is a good on ramp.
And one thing to consider too, because some people might need to have some anger or frustration or annoyance, something that kind of drives them to challenge the present day paradigm which they operate from, which is fine. Okay, this doesn't really serve me, and kind of angry in my body, and crazy, like, oh, I got to do something about it, and start exploring options. Nothing wrong with that. But I would say is, ultimately a better way of dealing with it is just exactly what you said, just developing the witness, creating some distance from it, looking at it kind of judgment free. Because sometimes when we operate from that judgmental space, like, oh my God, this is horrible, I need to do something differently, we're still taking the same person who we think we are from this horrible situation, horrible, whatever that means for you, to the next situation. So you're not changing yourself. It's still the same person you bring to the next space that you want to play with, which might work for you. But ultimately, you kind of want to not be driven by the anti of something. You want to be driven by, oh, I want to explore something new. Because the anti thing is still an attachment, which could lead you to make bad decisions, because it's still, like I said, you that led you to the original behavior is still the same you doing the new behaviors, or exploring the new place, the new option.
Maybe a slightly different way to interpret what you just said is, we can gain some level of enlightenment, but until we clean up or work through some of the issues we've had in the past, such as perhaps anger, we're just going to be a slightly more enlightened, angry person.
Yeah, yes, that's another way of putting it. Or maybe even not necessarily even more enlightened, just on a different path as the same angry person. Possibly. I mean, everyone's unique and different, and they show up differently in their lives. But I find that it's more helpful not to be against something because of that judgment, that attachment. Unless for some people, it might be necessary as a first step. Like, this is completely not serving me. It really pisses me off. I'm angry. Whatever happens to be. If that helps break that spell for that particular way of living, and breaks you open for exploring new options, that's cool. But if you could not do that, and you can kind of do it from a non-judgmental place, that's probably even a better way to go.
I think I started using like triggers to first start realizing when I was reacting to a story or letting that belief, whether it was true or not, kind of drive my behaviors. So if you have that emotional reaction, and through the meditation process, you're able to actually see how some of these stories are driving you, and actually look at it from that perspective, as opposed to, this is who I am and who I'll always be. So kind of.
And I want to just make sure I'm clear. Like, if you have the triggers and it helps break you open, like you're aware of them, and it helps break you open from a spell that you're under, from a certain cultural norm, nothing. I'm not saying that's horrible, that's bad. It's, if that breaks you open and try something new in your life that serves you better, that's fantastic. And as I said earlier, if you're not really careful, you're still the same person that's going down this new path. That's why a lot of the inner work, and Andrew, you kind of said that a couple of minutes ago, you got to clear some of the stuff out, so you're more clear when you're trying a new path. That's not the path that your culture or your family of origin or whomever recommended to you. Even yourself might have recommended it to you originally.
I have a curiosity. What started you off on the path to transpersonal and somatic studies?
Well, I can give you a story when I was 5, or I can give you a story when I'm 9.
What's your favorite?
Well, probably the 9, because the 5 is a story my mom told me. I don't remember it, so I'll start with the 9. I was fortunate retrospectively, not fortunate at the time, to have a really good therapist. Actually, I'll tell you the funny part of the story. You might have heard this part. So I had some health issues when I was a kid. I had some learning disabilities as a kid. So school was really hard for me, although I excelled in some places and I didn't do so well in other places. But I was called lazy. But I actually had a learning disability, which they finally discovered. But until they did, school was a really hard thing, And my mom took me to see a psychiatrist. And I was about to say I walked out, but I didn't walk out. I said literally to him and my mom, he's fat, he's smoking. How can he help me? I don't want to see him ever again. And my mom said, okay, probably embarrassed because her 9-year-old son just called the psychiatrist fat and smoking. But fortunately for me, my mom was like, listen to me. And so we left the office and she found me a therapist instead of a psychiatrist, because a psychiatrist most likely, especially in 1979, would have put me on drugs, and that would have changed the whole course of my life. And no value judgment. If that works for someone, that's cool. But fortunately for me, my path was different. And my therapist taught me biofeedback, guided imagery, meditation, got me to the martial arts. And that kind of set me off on that whole inner exploration space. So like my first books were Zen Mind, No Mind by Daisetsu Suzuki at age 9, Zen in the Martial Arts, the book on yoga. I subscribed to East West Journal, explored all kinds of funky diets. I mean, I just kind of, I had a normal childhood, but then also had this kind of weird, especially back then, weird side, exploring all these things. So I would say that was the first step into kind of this path of the transpersonal and somatic. And then I can tell you the second part of the story, if you'd like, where it went professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Okay. So college, normal college, I was studying political science. The plan was, and I lived in Northern Virginia outside of DC. So all our neighbors were military, law enforcement, intelligence, or contractors for the government. So that's kind of like, I had two worlds. One world was like policy, law enforcement, intelligence, blah, blah, blah. And the other world was kind of the inner stuff, meditation, yoga, martial arts. And this side was more personal. It wasn't a profession. My profession was I was going to go to college, get a degree. I started an MBA program because I interviewed with the government and they said you should go get an MBA because you can join the government at a higher level. I think I interviewed with, was it Army? A friends of the family, criminal investigation division, Army, I think it was, civilian side. He recommended that I go get an MBA. So I was literally in an MBA program, B plus, A's, doing really well. And a teacher, a friend of mine since I was 5 was murdered in a bar fight. And that just like fucked me. Sorry, I'll not say that on your show. Like talking out of the soul, like you really had me question everything. And then about a month later, a teacher committed suicide, which is like kind of added to it. I was like, life is short. What do I really want to do? And what I really want to do is like all this alternative stuff. I was doing fine in the MBA program, but I had no interest in the MBA. I have no interest in business. I still have an interest in like military intelligence, law enforcement stuff, but it's like my really deep interest was also other stuff. And that's when I ended up like doing this, heading off to California. I was in school in West Virginia. And that's where I started my graduate work in transpersonal psychology, and then eventually somatics and health psychology. So it was really the result of my friend being murdered, and then the suicide, which, like I said, launched me in a completely different direction. And the rest is history.
That's a pretty powerful share. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me. We go through events in our lives that in the moment tend to seem, or they are outright devastating and life altering, but they make us start thinking differently or questioning where we're headed to. And I think there's real power in that there's that shift, that ability to say, hold on a second, maybe life isn't just business as usual after this. Maybe I need to figure out what I really want, what life is really about, and where my power and passions really are. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. That's one of our pivot points as well.
Actually, a good lead in to, if you wouldn't mind explaining what the somatic psychology is.
Sure. Another word for somatic psychology is body psychology. One of the limitations of a lot of conventional schools of psychology is that they look at this, like only between the ears and here, maybe even higher up. Look at cognition, how you think about things, and behavior, and maybe some emotionality, but it's more about cognition. Not at all the schools, but a lot of the schools. And through my studies, I just kind of realized, and I can actually tell you the story that led me to actually go study somatic psychology, if you like, but it's a recognition that we're fully embodied beings, that we live inside of our bodies, and there's amazing amounts of intelligence if we tap into it inside our bodies, pleasure and wisdom, and just intelligence, as I mentioned. And it requires us to kind of be aware of what's happening inside our bodies. And as you guys know, through not only being aware of it, but how do you manage it towards, self-mastery and then service? It would kind of be the two keys for But you have to be aware of it first before you can manage it. And then as you manage, you can express what's ever happened in the body is useful or not. So somatics is like you just like living inside of your body and gaining access to that wisdom that's there, not just inside of your head. And the science is actually catching up to what the yogis have known for hundreds and thousands of years. That we are kind of a distributed intelligence. That we have a brain in the heart, we have a brain in the gut. And we're finding out that other organs, systems of our body also have various types of intelligences if you start paying attention to it. That's the brief on somatics or body psychology.
Yeah, there's been a lot of interesting work coming out regarding the brain, heart, gut connection, and how we actually have neurons in the heart and the gut that inform. So it's a whole body system. They inform each other. It gives new meaning or a new perspective to trusting your gut or going with your gut, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you just want to add to this, we don't have to necessarily go on this path, but you just think about the microbiome. The trillions of things that live inside of us that also influence how we think and feel and our behaviors as well. So we're not even just an agenic thing that operates in the world. Like we also have all these living beings inside of us that help create who we experience ourselves to be. It's pretty trippy.
Going a little sci-fi, it almost correlates slightly, a little bit perhaps to the Star Wars Force metachlorians, and but yes, that's pretty powerful stuff, right? It's just amazing what science is revealing to us now.
Yeah, and just so folks would have it, when I talk about the intelligence of the body and management, I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about. It might be helpful just for like a short little brief on that one. Simple as breath. I mean, so if you're stressed out, you can change your breathing patterns and reduce your stress. I mean, that's a simple example of using the intelligence within the body to manage your states of consciousness, or in this case, to change your state from one that's stressed out to one that's relaxed. But you can also manage the breath for focus purposes, or for expanding your consciousness, or for creativity, or tons of different purposes of changing your breath patterns for certain ends that you seek. But it's through the body. You can't just think your way out of that. You have to actually change your physiology, in this case, your respiration, to change your consciousness.
Getting out of our heads and into our hearts a little bit more.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. So when Casey was reading your bio, she had touched on spiral dynamics. What does that mean, and how does it relate to the bigger picture of what you're doing?
So just for folks to know, so I do coach, I do teach, and I coach for a wide variety of programs, including the one that you were all part of, but I also do transpartisan public policy. So I work on national security issues and foreign affairs and defense reform and cybersecurity, a whole wide range of issues. So if you go back to the original story we were talking about, like, my interest in intelligence, law enforcement, government, I still do that work, but from the outside. That parallels my work as a coach and teacher. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. Spiral dynamics is a model. Claire Graves invented it. Don Beck and Chris Cowan popularized it. Don Beck is a teacher of mine. I got certified level 1 and 2 with him in the early 2000s. And it is a model that helps one understand how individuals and cultures go through and organizations too, go through certain stages of development, how they adapt to ever-changing life conditions. And it's helpful if both for looking at the individual, but also looking at cultures and organizations. And it's always helped me with my policy work to help me understand where someone's coming from when they talk about their belief system. I can see how they create the world in which we're living in, create meaning, their values, which they're trying to express. That way I can meet them where they're at. And as you know, for we have the 5 plateaus. 5 plateaus kind of nicely model Don Beck's spiral dynamics. And I was also part of Ken Wilber's Integral Institute, which at one point there was a nice relationship between Don and Ken. So you had spiral dynamics integral. It doesn't exist anymore. But that's another model that's kind of a large systemic model of looking at how, as we would say, I wean it, the individual internal, the individual objective, the social internal meaning, or the cultural internal meaning, how we make meaning amongst people, and then like how systems operate. It could take a couple hours to really break down the integral model, but that's kind of, it's a really interesting model for trying to understand the different forces at play in our world. And your question for me though, I use it for my policy work, the spiral dynamics and the integral model, as a kind of a way of kind of looking at the world, but also use it with my individual coaching. And if I'm doing groups as well, because it's just another model to understand how people show up in the world, the values that they hold and how they express them and how they make meaning of the world we live in.
Yeah, so working in law enforcement and security type areas, it seems like it would be really easy to go, to a negative space as far as how you view people, and letting that maybe be a little overwhelming. Does this system help you kind of separate that, or is it more the
Oh, that's good.
internal work that you do on yourself?
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
maybe both?
Yes, and actually, that's a really good question. Like spiral dynamics and just my training as a therapist does provide me some insight into human nature, as best as I can from what I understand, which helps me take things less personally. Like, as we were talking earlier, there are cultural forces, there are familial forces, there are intergenerational forces that help mold us. And the more you can see that, the more you can be like, oh, I can understand why they do what they do and where they're coming from. And which helps me take it less personally. That doesn't mean when I'm doing my policy work that I don't have moments. And actually, it's a funny joke. I went to an ancestral conference, paleo ancestral conference quite a few years ago. And I met a guy who I knew from Twitter, but I had actually never met. And we sat down, we're talking. And he's like, what happens to you twice a year? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because you just put out some great stuff on Twitter, really, life affirming and aspirational, and even your policy work is not very transpartisan, but like twice a year you kind of get angry and nuts. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm a human being. These things can drive me crazy, and some of our so-called leaders do drive me crazy, but yeah, it's helpful. The internal work and the kind of the ways of seeing why people do what they do is helpful too through these models.
Yeah, I don't know how similar it is, but I've studied the map of consciousness, where it walks through the different levels of how our view on life is affected by what consciousness level we're at. And sounds sort of similar, but I think in doing that kind of opened my eyes up to being a lot more accepting and less judgmental of others. And
Yeah.
This episode of Fierce Planet Adventures podcast is brought to you by 5 Mountain Coaching, licensed unbeatable mind coaching, integrated accelerated vertical growth across 5 domains of cutting-edge development, designed by retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine. Learn the Big 4 skills of mental toughness and resiliency. Discover the 6 pillars of performance. Test your mettle with custom-created crucibles across all 5 domains. Visit 5mountaincoaching.com to schedule your free 1-hour unbeatable mind coaching session. That's the number 5, mountaincoaching.com. Begin your journey to becoming unbeatable today.
Michael, you've been working on a new project that you've rolled out called the Emergent Human, and
Sir.
pretty exciting stuff. We'd like to have you tell us a bit about what you're doing with that project. And I guess starting out with, where did the name originate?
Great. So the name's really funny. A former client of mine, actually, this is a couple of years ago, came to me and he said, his name's Larry, great guy. He said, I'm sick of you creating and building other people's programs. I want you to build your own. And so I'm like, okay. So he actually was nice enough to pay a branding person to work with me to help build out my own program. And which was great for me is, I got to bring up all these, like interests and things I've studied and places I've explored. It's transpersonal, the somatics and eco work and the spiral dynamics, and kind of bring it all together to create the program, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I was trying to think, what would the great name be that would kind of describe what I'm attempting to do? You guys will appreciate this because I spent months and I came up with this name and this name and this name and this name. And it's a Friday morning. I was like, I'm done. I give up. I can't do this anymore. I'm wasting my time trying to figure out an effing name for this program. I'd rather be doing the work. And then Friday afternoon, it came to me because I gave up. I let go. And then my, creative juices started flowing, which is not surprising because this is what we teach. I had to eat my own dog food that day. But the Emergent Human it's a recognition because I've spent time in the kind of spiritual space. And a lot of people talk about the final stage, like they're enlightened, and this is the final thing for us. And I always thought, I was a little kind of weary of that. I never thought there was like a final stage for people. Life is always changing and adjusting, and the challenges are always changing for us. And I thought, I want to create something that recognizes there's nothing final for us. We're going to keep changing and adjusting and growing, no matter, unless we're dead, our species is wiped out or something like that. But so there's nothing final. So the Emergent Human came to me because it's like there's an emergence, there's a constant unfolding of what's possible, potentials within us, but there's no final stage for that unfolding to like peak at, like in terms of a mountain. There's no top of the mountain. So it's constantly emerging, the capacities and the skills and ways of being in the world that would help us thrive are going to constantly change as we learn more and we experience new things. So that's kind of where the Emergent Human came from. Always emerging. There's an emergence to this process.
Nice. Yeah, that's beautiful. Eloquent, thanks. I think. A couple things came up for me there.
Sure.
When you were describing that is, as we evolve or as we take our next step on our path or on our journey, we have revelations, we have things that come up, insights. But the neat thing and the scary thing at the same time is there's always one more layer of the onion to peel away. There's always more insight or more experience to be applied to what you just learned. And there really is no final destination. I think in UM we say that there's no there. We just keep on going and emerging as human beings. So I think that's perfect.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun retrospectively for it to finally emerge on that Friday afternoon.
Nice. So your program, how do you have it structured, or what services are you providing, or who are your targets? Who are you looking to help?
And you guys will, so I'll answer the last one first and then kind of work backwards, and you guys will appreciate this. So one of the critiques I got when I was putting the site together and the languaging and stuff was, it's too esoteric. And it's too esoteric for an audience that doesn't meet me where I want to meet someone to work with. But for someone who's on a path who I want to work with, they'll grok the language and it'll speak to them and they'll come to me. That's who I want to work with. They might not know the word transpersonal. They might not know the word somatic. It's no specific words, but they're on a path where they want to explore what it means to live a spiritual life, or they want to learn to be inside of their body and all the wisdom that's inside of their body. They want to live more from a loving, caring, compassionate place with all others within their species and other kin that are non within our species. So it's like they would come to my site, or they might listen to me and they go, oh, some of those words don't ring true for me in terms, because I don't know what they mean, but the message speaks to me. And that's the kind of person I want to work with, is someone who's already on a path, a spiritual path, if that's what you want to call it, or a path of growth and development. And they want to work in a very holistic way. So the program has 4 pillars, if you want to. DOIT, do it. Design. So design a life based on your own values. And that's kind of what we started this conversation about. Like, how can you see through the veil of our cultural forms and family of origin influence, and kind of like, okay, that's all great, but how do I actually want to live my life? And I help my clients explore that, so they can design a life that's based on like what's soulful for them, not what they're told how to live their lives. So that's D. O is optimize their body, mind. So I work with them on diet, nutrition, fitness, movement, sleep, stress management, all those kind of good things, and help them create a plan that kind of serves them to optimize their body and their mind. So that's the O. The I is integrate ancestral wisdom. And for me, this kind of goes back to one of the questions you guys asked, but there's 2 pieces of it. One is kind of a more of a paleo evolutionary biological approach, like as human beings, as embodied human beings, what is the best way for us to live as biological beings? The 24-hour day-night cycle, certain foods, certain ways of relating to other human beings. There's certain kind of knowns, if you kind of look at evolutionary biology, of what's appropriate for us. That's one way I look at integrating ancestral wisdom. The other is your specific ancestral wisdom from your family line and your ancestors. So if you're a Celt, like, your family lineage goes back to the Celts or the Spartans, or, it doesn't have to be the Spartans, but, a lineage in Greece, I help my clients explore those lineages, not just their family, but like the broader tribe, you might say, because there's a lot of power that they can access if they grab onto the wisdom from that lineage. So I also help them integrate that into their work too. And then the T is transcend. And this goes completely back to how we started this conversation. Transcend the limits, our own self-imposed limits for the way we think about things, our negative loops in our head, to familiar limits, to cultural limits. We have all these, like we started at the very beginning, all these different forces which kind of help create the reality we live in, which is limiting. Like, okay, how do we transcend those limits? And it's not just cognitively. You can't just necessarily think your way out of those limits, because a lot of those limits are like deeply embedded in the nervous system. And that's where the somatic work can come in, or the transpersonal work, where you kind of do some non-ordinary states work to induce a different experience of the world in which you live in, or the world within you, and how it expresses in the outside world. So let's do it. And then there are 21 aspects of the program that we get into, and it's one-on-one. I work with couples. I can work with groups. I'm running 2 masterminds for other programs, so I haven't launched my own yet, but I've done hundreds and hundreds of groups over the 30 years I've been doing, 23 years I've been doing this, however long I've been doing this. Yeah. So in individuals, couples, and groups.
Wow. That's powerful. It's whole person, right? It's a whole system. It's not just working on one aspect. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and what I want people to take home with this too, is if you want real transformation in your life, you have to do some deep work. You have to do some work. It's not just going to a seminar or a weekend here or there, or reading a book, and then everything is magically going to change. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that's out there in the coaching world is that, hey, this person's going to do the work for me. The coach is going to do the work for me, and I just have to show up and talk about stuff. And that's part of it, right? But there's a co-creating the experience with the coach and between the coach and the client. And what I see here in your system is you really go deep into a lot of or several different aspects of this the whole idea or the whole system. And there's a lot of power and magic in that. And I can see this being super transformational for anybody who wants to take on that journey.
And just to add to that too, because you guys have experienced what I'm about to say together as a couple. So you guys are also exemplars of what I'm about to say. Another piece of the puzzle, and actually I'll have two pieces of the puzzles, is when I work with folks, I want to work with their team. So, I talk to people's doctors and naturopaths and psychologists if they have one, or nutritionists or physical trainers, because I want us all to be on the same team heading in the same direction. And although I'm trained as a therapist, if you have a therapist, I want to make sure anything I'm recommending is not contraindicated from the therapy you're doing, because I'm a coach and a therapist in this case. Or if you're at, a medical condition, I want to make sure anything I'm recommending to you is not, is within what your doctor or your DO might recommend to you as well. So that's really important to me. So kind of I work in this very systemic way with your team, and your team could be your spouse too, your workmates, anyone who's part of your tribe, basically. Because as you guys know, if you don't have the support, you might have some breakthroughs, right? But if you don't have the support to kind of lock them into place, and you have a lot of pressure pushing you back to who you were before you had the breakthroughs, most likely because of that pressure from loved ones, not that they mean harm to you, but they just have expectations of who you're supposed to be because that's who you've been. They'll help lock you into that place. So it's helpful to make sure that your spouse, your kids, your workmates, whomever it happens to be, your other people, your tribe, know what you're attempting to do and support the changes you're trying to make. It's just kind of a systemic approach I take. And then I also offer a team, because I'm well read, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. So I have a nutritionist if you need one. I have doctors if you need them, functional medicine doctors I can recommend to you. I have Enneagram practitioners. I have human design practitioners, different kind of personality typing systems. I work with the Y Institute. So there's a lot of different people that are on my team that I bring forward to work with you. I have a trainer who specializes in like endurance work. So if you want to do crazy 100-mile endurance races in the Sahara, I have a guy for that, Jeff Grant, work with him. So I also have a great team of people that I can, reach into, pull from to help you on your path.
Wow. That's powerful. I love it. Now, harkening back to a conversation we had last week, I may get this wrong, so if I do, bear with me. But you're working with a couple different organizations. I think one of those groups has taken up what you're doing here with the Emergent Human and is rolling it into part of their training. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, which is great. So I work for Spartan 7. Spartan 7 is a SEAL-run company run by Chris Smith and Dan Cirillo. And what they do is they take our clients on tactical training adventures. So literally, I think like 4 weeks, I think it is, they're going to do a hostage rescue training. But they also do shoot houses and sniper training and jump out of helicopters and all kinds of really kind of cool tactical training stuff. My role is to coach and kind of keep the momentum going between these cool tactical trainings for inner development. And what was great is Dan Cirillo, who founded the company, said, do your work inside of my company. It's yours. Like, he doesn't want to own Emergent Human. He doesn't want to, just be who you are, train my people the way you'd want to train my people. So he gave me the opportunity all last year, and this is my second year working for them, is to kind of test out what is now the Emergent Human with his people. And it's great because, just to have someone I work with who's like, do your stuff. I'm not going to control it. I don't want to own it. I just want my people to be better human beings is perfect.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So what does the pathway look like for somebody who wants to start working with you?
So they can contact me. You can go to my website, which I would imagine that you'd put a link or something. They can send me an email. And then we just get on a Zoom. And, it's funny because my wife will say that I'm a capitalist in theory and a socialist in practice. What she means by that is like, if you contact me and I think there's a better fit for you for someone else, I'll tell you that. Like, I don't want to waste your time and money if I think like working with this person over here is better for you than work with me. So like we'll talk, I'll get a sense of who you are. I'll lay out my program for you, see if it's a good fit for you. If it's not, like I said, I'll refer you to someone that might be a better fit for you or a different program. And my program, and you said this really well, Andrew, is it's not just like come and talk to me for 50 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever. And then I talk again in a couple of weeks. I give you a lot of homework. I mean, you have a journal to do, you have an annual training plan to do. I send spot drills 3 or 4 or 5 times a week to you that you have to do. There's homework between sessions. So it's like, it is a program. It's not your normal coaching.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. We've still got a few minutes here before we switch or sign off. What else would you like folks to know about Michael and about what he does and where they can contact you?
Yeah. So like you, I always see this as a constant, life is a constant place to explore and grow. So I have to eat my own dog food. So I'm always learning. So this year, and you guys might see this on Instagram because I literally put this out like an hour ago. As you guys know, and I do this for myself and just for clients, it's important to create a learning program for yourself on a daily basis. At we call it a personal PhD. Here's my program. This is what I'm going to do this coming year. I built that for so I still do that because I think it's really important, and I do it for myself. So, for instance, this year, there are a couple of things I'm studying, which I think is fun for me and will hopefully benefit my clients. One, I'm getting a certificate in pre and perinatal psychology and health. So I can better understand from conception to birth, that whole process, and how if you can work with mothers and fathers or whatever the combination might be, but definitely mothers because they're the ones who give birth, how they can think differently about preconception to conception to birth, how they can set the stage for possibly healthier human beings generationally down the road. Everything from breastfeeding, which we know, has a whole bunch of health benefits, to a vaginal birth because the child gets the microbiome from the vaginal fluids of the mother, which has a whole bunch of health benefits. Nothing against C-sections if it's medically necessary, but we do too many that are not medically necessary. But I'm studying all that because I've worked with clients who are in that space. And I'm like, wow, and you probably had this experience too. A lot of my clients are like 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they're dealing with a lot of issues. I'm like, wow, if they would have had a different experience from preconception to conception to birth in their own lives, and then soon thereafter birth, they would probably not be dealing with some of the same issues that they come to me first as a therapist many decades ago, now as a coach presently dealing with. So at 2 levels, like, okay, how can I help the next generation of parents create the conditions for maybe healthier connections to their babies and healthier relationships, which sets the stage for healthy human beings down the road. And then at the policy level, because I still do transpartisan work, is like, oh, what policy shifts might be necessary to change how we do birthing in our country? Because we've medicalized it, and only in very small numbers of cases do we actually have to medicalize it. Most cases, it's natural. And if you can set the conditions for that to occur and then support breastfeeding, other such things, you have the benefit of a healthier institutions that support healthier birthing processes. That's one thing I'm studying this year. Another one, and you guys are going to love this because this is like completely right up your alley. COVID has made me do all my stuff virtually. But eventually, kind of post-COVID, whatever that is, next week, next month, next decade, whatever the fuck that happens, I want to take my work out into the wilderness, into nature, and I still will do some virtual stuff because I have clients all over the world. and they're not necessarily going to fly in for an hour session. But yeah, locally, I can work with people for an hour, a couple hours, or long days, or a couple of days in a row in natural settings, doing the kind of work that I do. So one of the things I'm studying will be, I haven't started studying yet. I'll be studying soon, is like, how do you do some of the work that I do in natural settings? So I'll be studying that as well. So like more the eco-psychology side of things, how environments can induce certain states and open people up to be in the world different ways, which you guys, Jesus, do all the time, naturally, without probably even thinking about it.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess that takes me to my near final question is,
Sure.
So the emergent human, now obviously our theme is, the 5 mountains of human development, 5 mountains of unbeatable mind, but we use outdoor adventure as our vehicle. How would your program benefit somebody who is, maybe just getting into the outdoor adventures? Could be mountaineering, canyoneering, rock climbing, or well, hiking. Just pick anyone that you'd like. Or even somebody who's seasoned at it, but maybe has kind of hit a point in their adventuring career where, they're maybe a little bit stuck.
So I love the idea of adventures. So let me start with like my way into answering your question would be, how can you help someone take that mindset? So, they like to hike, they like the mountain climb, whatever they happen to do in the outdoor setting, and take that as a kind of a mental program of sorts into the totality of their life. So it's not like, oh, I go do this adventurous thing 4 or 5 hours on the weekend, or whatever, however long it takes. But like my whole life is adventuresome. Like that's my kind of way of approaching life. It's more playful and fun. That doesn't mean life isn't hard and challenging, but even when you approach hard and challenging things from a more playful place, less attachment, it can make it a lot more interesting. And you can actually probably more be successful in dealing with it than not. So I would say first thing to do is like, oh, you're already like have this adventure mindset. How do we expand that adventure mindset to the totality of your life? And then specific to like UM as an example, self-mastery, a lot of these are universal skills. Like, how do I learn to be inside and manage my body so I can focus more clearly on my goals in the external world, like climbing or skiing or hiking, whatever it is. So it's also could be about managing internal states, so I can be highly focused and more skillful at like flow states in what I'm intending to do. So that's kind of another way of thinking about it as well. So I would say that those two things are really good. And then you asked about someone who's kind of plateaued. And I would go back to my first thing. Okay. So they plateaued in this one area of their life. But I found that you expand that playful space in all areas of your life, it will come back and kind of help you rebalance in that one stuck space. And I like to joke, like there are 2 podcasts. There's a book and a podcast I like to listen to when I've plateaued. And I like to say when I have a stick up my butt. And I'm like, oh God, and Christopher Ryan, who wrote Civilized to Death. I don't know if you listen to this podcast, but he's a very laid back podcast interviewer. I really like his style, and he introduces the most weirdest people in the world, not just your usual like normal people. And for me, when I listen to him, like, oh, I can be, because he's very playful, he's very fun, he's really big into pleasure. I'm like, I can kind of relax my mental construct of like I have to constantly force myself and have to stick in my butt. I'm like, wow, I can just, it's like smoking marijuana, but you listen to him instead. So you're not gonna get busted if you're in the wrong state. It's like, that's kind of like what it is for me. Like, wow, it just kind of relaxes me. And then sometimes when I get to like caught up in myself and my own thinking, I'll listen to Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, which I've listened to probably hundreds and hundreds of times. Because I've been following his work since he first came out with that book. But the book is interesting to me for that same reason. It's like it kind of breaks me out of my spell. So those are kind of 2 things I will do if I'm kind of locked into my own head too much and I need to break out of my own limited thinking. even as expansive as my thinking might be for others, it's still limited in my own self. And that's kind of the connection to the emergent human. Like the progress is continual. If you think like I'm there, then you become the reactionary conservative against further change. And I don't want to be the Johnny One Note who said, this is the way it has to be, and this is what you should be doing. I want to constantly evolve myself so I can be an exemplar for my clients to constantly evolve themselves as well. Make sense?
Absolutely. What an exciting journey for anyone to undertake. This is what we're here for, right? This is what life's about. This is about expanding yourself, your consciousness, your awareness, the way you show up in the world, the way you move through life, and the way you embrace your passions and your purpose. So thank you, Michael, very much. Yeah. Again, the Emergent Human with Michael Ostrolenk. Instagram, Twitter, website, we'll have all those links in the show notes. And once again, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to see you guys. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.